Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2023 High Impact Giving Toolkit, supporting a more secure future for all. I'm Kelly Andrews from the Center of High Impact Philanthropy at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice. Today, we will hear an introduction from Elaine Martyn, Senior Vice President of the private donor group of Fidelity Charitable. Then, CHIP's founding executive director, Kat Rosqueta, will present the themes of the guide and begin a discussion with our panelists. Those panelists include Casey Johnson, Vice President of the National Portfolio and Learning of GreenLIght Fund, and Euria, Director of the Lipman Family Prize at Wharton's McNulty Center. We will then open up the webinar for audience Q&A, so please enter your questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. Now, here is Elaine.
Welcome, and I'm so thrilled and delighted to be here this afternoon to join you as we celebrate one of my favorite launches, the launch of our Center for High Impact Philanthropy's Impact Giving Guide 2023. And Fidelity, we are proud partners of CHIP, and we have been platinum sponsors of this guide since 2016. And it truly is one of those programs that and tools that our donors look for year after year as a resource for them as they think about how to be the most effective philanthropist that they can be. So it is our honor to be the 2023 Toolkit Platinum sponsor. And as we thought about the need and the opportunities here, one of the things that we've really been recognizing at Fidelity Charitable is that so much of philanthropy often seems that it's tied to the financial markets. And traditional thinking makes us think that those financial markets are the primary determinant of how we give. But I think what we saw was that over the last few years, COVID really upended that. And we see that we've had our highest grant-making years in history in the last few years. Recent giving levels are high up, even amid volatility and insecurity. We're also seeing really exciting intergenerational conversations about giving. For example, in 2020, I had so many calls from people sheltering in place with their adult children who were asking about questions and topics like structural inequality, one of the themes that we see in CHIP's 2023 Toolkit. And we know that every one of our donors, regardless of what their primary focus is also interested in the effects of climate change. And that's another focus of the Toolkit's exemplars. So what we really are excited to see is that these people, these donors of ours, are developed a new muscle in COVID that forced them to flex in a different way. And that was to have a commitment to moving money and moving the needle on issues that matter to them and the communities they care about. And while the issues may be different from donor to donor, all our donors are looking for information that they trust, tools to help them decide, and a community to help give and to learn from and with. And so really in that, I've just described the Center for High Impact Philanthropy's mission. And so with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, the founding executive director of the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, Kat Rosqueta.
Elaine, thank you so very much for your partnership over the years. Truly, we would not be able to offer this free toolkit and guide and this webinar were it not for the longstanding partnership that we've had with you and your team. So with that, I want to, for those of you who have not been able yet to spend time on the toolkit, give you a brief overview, and then we're going to dive right into a conversation with some of the key partners who helped us develop it, and in particular helped us source some of the nonprofit exemplars that illustrate the evidence-based strategies that you'll learn about in the toolkit. And I'll start with the strategies that Elaine mentioned. For many people, you'll hear folks talk about we're in a post-COVID environment. And of course, what that means is very different depending on the individual or family or community that you're in. And while some of us are able to experience what feels like a level of normalcy and stability, for many, many people in the US and around the world, that is still not the case. And that's what's behind our theme of the toolkit being a way for all donors to support a more secure future for all. a way to do that is to support organizations and efforts implementing one or more of these 5 strategies. The first is recover learning lost and accelerate gains, particularly for those students who were already behind. So what we know is that education was disrupted for students of all ages, and education is cumulative. So even as schools have opened, we're still feeling, and those children and their families are feeling the effects of the closures and the uneven access to internet and rich learning experiences. The second strategy that we talk about is financial security. Right. It has been a volatile economy, and those who most feel that volatility and the lack of financial security are those at the lowest incomes. And frankly, even if you have a reliable income, we know only $500 of less than $500 of saving is enough to prompt real financial hardship, homelessness, health outcomes that can be very hard for somebody to recover from. So jobs, guaranteed income, connection to livelihoods, those are all ways donors can help. The next strategy is something Elaine mentioned, and something that we worked on with our partners at Lever for Change, an affiliate of MacArthur Foundation, is structural inequality. So what COVID showed was that there were disparities, lack of access, that were only exacerbated because of the pandemic and remain. And so by addressing structural inequalities, we are able to include those who have been left out to access to all the good things we know people need to thrive, to then be able to have access to them. The fourth is providing effective disaster relief. And what that means is across all 4 stages of effective disaster relief. And that is not just the immediate relief, but looking at rebuilding and resilience. And that is something, unfortunately, both natural and man-made disasters have been increasing. So the need to be there as donors has also only increased. And finally, another area that over decades we've seen a decline in, that donors around the world are working on, is the decline in democracy and the increase in authoritarianism. And there are great ways for donors to address this. One of the ways we talk about in the toolkit is just ensuring that everybody has access to trusted, reliable information about what affects them and their communities, because the lack of that, or news deserts, has been highly correlated to some of the things that we know undermine democracy, like lack of civic engagement and increased polarization. So those are some of the strategies. And to illustrate how in the real world philanthropic funding is making a dent in addressing all of those and implementing those strategies, we've sourced organizations from our partners that you're going to hear from shortly. I want to just quickly do a shout out to those organizations, and you can find lots of information on them on our website. Again, that's available for free, but just to give you a sense of what it can look like for a nonprofit to implement those strategies. We have 6 organizations in the US and 6 outside the US. In the US, All Our Kin, a nonprofit that is helping family childcare providers provide high quality care. And supporting family childcare centers is so important because that is one of the primary, most affordable and accessible ways for families in low-income communities to get high quality childcare. Compass Working Capital, which helps families in public housing build savings so that they are no longer reliant on public services, but can be set up in a way that they can pursue jobs, pursue education, and pursue long-term quality housing. Free From, which creates a path to safety for survivors of intimate partner violence. the risks of intimate partner violence and the inability to access resources to help survive were significantly increased, those risks and the lack of access because of COVID and the isolation that COVID presented. Leading Men Fellowship, which improves student performance by expanding the pool of teaching talent and diversifying the pool of teaching talent. Lift, which invests in parents to prevent multi-generational poverty. And Report for America, which eliminates one of the things that I said was a barrier to strong democracies. It eliminates local news deserts. Thousands of communities, particularly in the US, have no source of stories for their community. Those are some of the domestic organizations. Internationally, organizations like CAMFED International, which is breaking the cycle of poverty and inequality, specifically by targeting, by educating girls. CDD India, which brings sanitation and infrastructure to India's most neglected communities. Make a Difference, which builds a path out of poverty for abandoned children in India from young childhood all the way to early adulthood. National Geographic's Pristine Seas. Oceans are a primary source of livelihoods and food for billions of people around the world. And Pristine Seas is making sure that that incredibly critical resource will be available for generations. Project ECHO, which provides high quality medical care to underserved rural communities. And Yamba Malawi, which reduces extreme poverty in Malawi by supporting caregivers to very young children. So those are the organizations you can learn more about. Again, sourced from the partners who are going to be joining me in a moment in a conversation. In addition, you'll find a lot of other resources curated by our team, tips on how to have year-round impact, ways to avoid fraud. And if you're looking for organizations like the ones that we profile in communities you work in, you'll find a host of resources to help you locate them. So with that, I'm going to welcome my partners, CHIPS partners. Kelly already introduced them, but hopefully you see them all. Casey Johnson from GreenLIght Fund. Jeff Ubois from Lever for Change, an affiliate of the MacArthur Foundation. And Euria Min, one of our colleagues here at Penn, from the Wharton Family Prize, which is administered by the McNulty Center for Leadership here at the University of Pennsylvania. Okay, let's dive in. The theme of this year's toolkit is a more secure future for all. And I talked about some of the evidence-based strategies that we know can help create that. All of you as funders who work very closely with grantees, some in the US, in cities, others around the world. Can you talk a little bit more about what you are hearing and seeing from those nonprofits and their clients about what's needed for them to feel and be more secure? And I'll start with Casey.
Thanks, Kat, and thanks for having us here. GreenLIght works in 12 different communities around the country, and I could say 12 officially today because we are launching Chicago later today as our 12th site. And we work in partnership with those communities to really lift up the most pressing, urgent needs that our community residents are facing as they're experiencing poverty. And I would say each community is unique and different and has their local context, but if we're lifting up what some common themes have been as we've been in COVID and whatever this other side of COVID is, there's probably like 3 areas that that kind of continue to resonate and where we've made investments in a couple of our cities. One of them is in housing instability. I think all of us know the eviction moratoriums are lifting in so many cities. They have been lifting, and that is putting families, individuals, residents in hardship places right now to just have basic need of a safe place to rest and live and be with their families. And so we're really leaning in and looking at how we can help with, in particular, evictions, but also how we can help those who are aging out of the foster care system find stable housing and be stabilized there so that they can then meet the other needs, basic needs that they have for the family. So housing instability, evictions is a big one that's coming up in our communities. I don't think this will be a surprise to so many of you all who are joining us today, but mental health is another one that was well before COVID, but exacerbated through COVID for all populations, but particularly what we're seeing is for our youngest, of those students who experience remote hybrid scenarios, were isolated and away from their thriving schools and in their communities. That has taken its toll. And we are seeing not deep pipelines for mental health professionals. We're trying to see unique, innovative ways that mental health supports can come into the classroom, can come into school communities, can meet young people where they are and meet their needs where they are, whether it's in a social emotional learning context or whether it is in a context of trying to reduce suicide ideation. And in that kind of theme around schools and education, another common theme that we're seeing across so many of our communities is the crushing of our educator pipeline from all ends and all angles, likely tied to mental health supports and so much other issues that are going to be lifted up today, but really looking at where can we make investments as a funder and philanthropy around increasing a really diverse, robust, high quality educator pipeline. So I don't think that any of this is new, as you said, Kat, but it's definitely compounded over the years. And we're seeing such huge needs lifted up by communities asking for help, asking for innovation, asking for proven models that have been able to move the needle.
Great, thanks, Casey. And I noticed, I'll just encourage folks, please put any questions in the Q&A. I'll try to weave it into the conversation. Several of you said you were unable to see the slides that were meant to accompany my comments, but we'll make sure after this, when you get a follow-up email, we can provide those. Euria, I know in our conversations, many of the same issues that Casey just laid out, you have seen with some of the organizations that are Lipman Family Prize winners who tend to be working more outside the United States. So anything to add or any perspective based on, in contrast to Casey's and GreenLIGht's, more of a ex-US work?
Yeah, absolutely. The three organizations in particular that won the Lipman Family Prize last year and are featured in this year's Giving Guide, Make a Difference, and CDD Society, India, and Yamba, Malawi, they definitely experience a lot of the same that Casey was pointing out, as you noted, Kat, and specifically, especially with the COVID pandemic, we see the increased importance of addressing multidimensional poverty and child poverty in particular, with two of our organizations measuring beyond just income, looking at actual access to goods and services that are fundamental for development and water and housing and sanitation services, protection, education, information. All of that is so important. And I would add that these communities also often lack an access to just basic health infrastructure, and a reliable path out of intergenerational poverty. And of course, the pandemic didn't change any of those needs, but it really made it clear that a secure future really means having secure institutions that support these communities, and ensuring nonprofits have what they need to serve their communities is really a critical role for us in philanthropy.
And that's a great reminder that as philanthropic funders, donors, or professional grant makers, we only have impact through the good work of these nonprofit institutions and NGOs. So if those organizations and the people who create that change are insecure, right, and don't have the resources they need, then the philanthropic support isn't doing what we all hope it will do. Jeff, I know in your role with Lever for Change, you're actually there are many different competitions that that Lever for Change hosts. And so I'm curious across, maybe talk a little bit about what some of those competitions are, and then across all of them, what are you seeing it takes to support nonprofit organizations so that they are more secure and are able to sustain the impact that we all want to see?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here. Apologies for a little snafu on my end. As you noted, we run a variety of programs and competitions on behalf of other donors, and so their priorities set a lot of what we do. We have seen some themes emerge. Often those are around populations. So, for example, we've run competitions for gender and racial equity, competitions for to support refugees and early childhood development. We just announced the results of a Lego competition with Lego around building a world of play, and that's again an early childhood development activity. I think what cuts across the competitions are a sense of how do funders, the thing that we can do, since we're working with others to meet their priorities as donors, is that we can change the interaction with nonprofits in certain ways. So we try to, and what we've always worked to do, is to make the funding process a little more transparent and a little less hard to decode. I think there's a lot of stress that goes into fundraising. There's another element of scale. So the awards that we give, the final awards, are a minimum of $10 million. We do some planning grants in these competitions, but we try to walk people through the process of interacting with us in a way that makes it less confusing. And then I think there's a balance between how the funds are reported on. Is it a trust-based, is it more of a trust-based approach, or is it something more like a contract with the donor? And to the extent we can, we look for long-term, multi-year support. And I think we try to ensure that any kind of evaluation and assessment work is driven by the recipient, that it's work that they use for their purposes rather than something that we use in a supervisory way.
One of the so for folks who are participating, because for a lot of people, when they hear, oh, a $10 million prize, that's not something I'm ever going to provide. So to be very clear to everybody, that one of the reasons we partner with the folks that you see and choose exemplars the way we do and make it all available for free is because we truly believe and want to support anybody practicing high impact philanthropy. So you'll notice the way we describe some of those exemplars, whether you have $10, 10 million, as you know, some of the donors, or $1 billion, right? These are all evidence-based strategies and examples of how that money can create change. I know, Jeff, I had asked you, what would you like to see more of among funders? And I don't know if you recall this, but you had a really interesting answer that I wanted you to share with everybody else.
Well, I might give you a different answer. It's a different day. But shared awareness of problems, like a lightweight way of coordinating on larger issues. $10 million, that sounds like a lot until you think about how many trillions of dollars it's going to take to address a problem like climate or education. So how is it possible for funders to work together to address large problems without either getting in each other's way or leaving large gaps in what needs to be done? And one way that we're trying to do that is by publishing as much as possible about what we find and what we receive. Was that the answer you were thinking of?
Well, it is a great answer, because I think we teach this in High Impact Philanthropy Academy, which is it's a tension that all donors hold on funders. On the one hand, absolutely be ambitious with how you want to change the world. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, a 10 million gift won't solve a $10 trillion problem. And none of us, not even the largest foundation, the Gates Foundation, has enough financial resources to actually create the sustained change it wants to see. So I feel like the sharing information and collaboration is important for anybody practicing high impact philanthropy. And maybe we'll go with that theme. So all of you and all of the organizations we selected as exemplars, we selected in part because they emerged out of a collaborative process and because these institutions themselves demonstrate a real muscle around collaboration. So start again with Casey. Tell us more about collaboration and what does that look like with the organization, with GreenLIght and the organizations in the 12 cities across the country that GreenLIght supports?
It's such a great question, Kat, and I think about multiple levers, not to like pull from Levers for Change with Jeff, but like I think multiple levers and not going it alone. And that starts even with us. And I love how you said, whether it's $10 or 10 million or $1 billion or 50,000 or what, that for us, we raise and invest dollars in these amazing organizations. And so we're actually pooling quite a few resources together from local funders, supporters, champions to make our investments. So there's already a collective, collaborative body of individuals who have said, we don't know what you're going to pick, but we know it's going to be addressing the most pressing needs in community. We're in and pulling that together. And any one of our local investor coalitions ranges from 30 to potentially 100 that I know we have in Baltimore is probably our largest investor coalition. From there, it's in partnership with community members, selection advisory council members, all local, to really identify what that critical need is, and then really look at amazing models around the country that have shown that they can scale in whatever way they scale. We've seen many different ways of doing it, can show that they have that collaborative partnership orientation. Because what I can say, anything that's going to scale in partnership with GreenLIght to one of our cities, if they have the mentality of, we've got the best thing that nobody else does, and we're going to bring it in and impart it on you, community, that is not going to fly. That's not going to fly in Philadelphia. That is not going to fly outside of the US. It's definitely not going to fly in the US. And so being really thoughtful and intentional about understanding these nonprofit organizations, how do they partner? What makes them a good partner? What do they look for in a good partner? Because they know they cannot do it alone. And All Our Kin is a great example. We invested in bringing them into Kansas City recently, and it wasn't for All Our Kin to come in and impart and do their work in Kansas City. It was recognizing there's already a really amazing local nonprofit entity, the Family Conservancy, who was looking for somebody who had experience building family child care networks in a really high quality, impactful way, which is All Our Kin sweet spot, and having this amazing partnership together to work together to build that in the Kansas City community, and to really impact change in the early childhood space for young people and their families. We've also seen that with our investment in Leading Men Fellowship, which is also highlighted in your guide. We've invested in bringing them into Atlanta and into Cincinnati in deep partnership with school districts who have particularly invested in public pre-Ks, preschool promises in their community, but recognizing that young men of color are not reflected in an early childhood classroom, and how critical that is for young people's experience as they're going through their education to see themselves represented. And so that partnership is with school districts, it's with local funders, local community-based organizations, and even in the case of Cincinnati, with the Ohio Department of Ed, that is really looking at that test case in Cincinnati to see how could this possibly be potentially expanded to other parts of Ohio. So all of that is not done alone. And the last thing I'll say, Kat, is it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And to Jeff's point, that multi-year commitment, multi-year funding, you know, that is a part of it, because this isn't going to happen in 2 months, 3 months down the line.
Absolutely. We see that a lot in the Lipman Family Prize winners too, and just how much, you know, it's about that long-term investment in the work that they're doing, as well as just all of the organizations that are highlighted in the guide this year. They really showcase that you can't advance social change alone. You need to be doing it together, collaborating with others. CDD Society is a really great example of that. They provide sources of water and clean water, and building a sustainable nature-based form of water decontamination. And it's all through partnerships. It was really originated by a group of civil society organizations from different parts of India who believed that the sanitation challenge could not be solved by a single stakeholder, and it required a collaborative approach. So they all came together. They developed an innovative nature-based decentralized solution in collaboration with a German nonprofit and other organizations, and then together created this, the DWATS system. And they also, in implementing their work, they partner with local government entities across India, organizations. They have to partner with local individuals on the in the communities who are trained to maintain the water treatment systems, so that the community really owns the solution, and it's not that the organization is the holder of the, you know, of the technology or the solution there. Another organization, Yamba Malawi, they focus on the economic well-being of families with young children. And in addition to working directly with caregivers, they also partner closely with community leaders, community-based organizations, the community-based childcare centers, and they develop these individualized action plans and create sustainable businesses, knowing that their poverty graduation model really relies on partnership, because Yamba Malawi is working toward leaving in 3 years, leaving those places in 3 years, knowing that the communities will carry forward through all the new, everything that's developed through their work together. Make a difference also, our third organization in the Giving Guide, they work helping children in need of care and protection in India to break out of that cycle of poverty. And they mobilize the community, hundreds, thousands of people to really fill in the gaps of existing care delivered at the orphanages by really using that network of people and mentors to wrap around them.
Jeff, it looks like you're, yeah, please jump in.
I was curious about this notion of how the organizations that you support are networking with each other. Casey, particularly in the cities, but you're in your portfolio as well. How can funders better support interaction among their grantees without sort of shotgun marriages or you know, useless introductions, but things that are more organic and yet seen as part of the results of your work?
I have an initial idea, an example to give, Jeff, but I would love to hear what what's coming up for you. You know, more actually in Kat's backyard, in Chip's backyard in Philadelphia, our most recent investment there was actually informed by our existing portfolio in community. But we had previously invested in Center for Employment Opportunities, which I think many of us know, and is a phenomenal workforce development organization, really targeting those individuals who are justice involved and returning citizens. And we've actually brought them to 5 different cities, but in our first investment in Philadelphia quite a few years ago, and they're doing a phenomenal job in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. And as we were doing our latest selection cycle in Philadelphia to look for that next investment, really going to our existing portfolio, or we say portfolio organizations, our existing grantees, to have them be a part of saying like, what's missing for you in doing your work, and in community, and how we can amplify, extend, deepen your impact. And heard pretty clearly from the Center for Employment Opportunities, as well as many other justice involved organizations in Philadelphia, there's amazing ones there, that many people are returning citizens are coming out with debt, coming out with massive fees, and not having access to cash to be able to, and flexible cash to be able to address that so that then I can focus on work, I can focus on housing, mental health, like all the other supports. And we made an investment in an amazing organization out of Virginia called Fountain Fund that does loans to returning citizens. And they are intentionally partnering with Center for Employment Opportunities and many other just as involved organizations as they're launching their work in Philadelphia. But that's one step, I think, that's pretty easy to make. It maybe seems obvious.
Yeah.
Talk to your grantees, talk to your
Yeah.
portfolio, find out what's their blocks, like what's helping them from really like that next step, what services are needed to serve
And
their.
you know what you're reminding me of, Casey, actually is, and this may be, Jeff, one of the reasons we love partnering with you and the folks at Lever for Change is the curiosity that you bring. But I would actually say in some ways, there are some really great lessons learned from the Lever for Change competitions. And, you know, I'm thinking of two of the organizations that we sourced. So both of which are international organizations operating in local communities. So just as Casey gave a great example of sort of, you know, the GreenLIght fund model, I'm thinking of Pristine Seas, which develops marine protected areas. And then I'm thinking of the University of New Mexico's Project Echo, right? Which is working in India, right? Talk about like first cross-border and building those kinds of bridges that Casey and Euria both talked about. Can you talk a little bit more about how those organizations are partnering with leaders and other institutions in those communities, and maybe to what extent is that related to the work that we know we did together around Choosing Change, which is a toolkit for structural inequality. And I know every time we talk about this with you, you also bring up Mackenzie Scott. So I'm going to give you a lot to chew on, but yeah, give us a sense of that.
So I'll just mention one of the things that really struck me about Project Echo first was that that's cooperation based on an exchange of expertise. So Project Echo ensures that people who might otherwise not have access to medical specialists or the knowledge of medical specialists can do that. So it's really taking advantage of, in some ways, what we all learned through the pandemic, which is how to talk online. The Pristine Seas, I think, has taken on the issue of how do we create a proper value for commons, for oceans, for things that are not private property. So they're operating kind of at the boundary of where there's a system of private property and private enterprise, and where there's something that you know, you can just take the biggest boat you can possibly build and the biggest net you can possibly create and drag it through the ocean until there's nothing left, right? So that is an interesting example, I think, where philanthropy often can do well, which is in an area where there is neither a market solution nor yet a government solution. Mm-hmm. And they also, I think, have the benefit of beauty, but they are dealing in the end with questions of intrinsic value, and that can be a harder case to make in this world right now. The structural inequality issue, which was a project, well, I will say everyone at Lever for Change learned a lot from working with the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, because we do our best to come up with intelligent criteria, useful criteria to address a problem, but to have something that was so cross-cutting and so grounded in all the thinking that had been done before was incredibly powerful. And we have seen other donors that we talk to look at this Choosing Change rubric to think about their own work. So that was very exciting. And I think the approach that Mackenzie Scott does take, where the burden of sourcing and supporting and reporting on grants lies with the funder rather than with the grantee, and that seems like a way of rebalancing some of the power dynamics in philanthropy that we wish would change.
This is actually, there have been questions coming in via the Q&A function. Thank you, everyone, for sending them. I'm gonna start because I know we only have about 15 minutes left, addressing them. And I'm going to pose this one to Euria, partly because we are lucky to have a partner that is a part of McNulty, which is the leadership initiative at Wharton. And I know thinking about leadership at every level, how do we cultivate it among the fellows that participate? How do we identify it with the nonprofits that become the winners of the Lipman Family Prize? How do we support the increased leadership capacity of the winners? That is something that, Euria, I know you and your team think about a lot. So one question that came in was, how can we create a new model of leadership and leadership teams? And I know that's a big question. There's a whole faculty at Penn working on it, but just in reaction to what you see in the Giving Toolkit, what are some thoughts there?
Yeah, that's such a broad question. I feel like we could dig in.
That could be another webinar.
Exactly.
Yeah, seriously.
You know, it's interesting to think about creating a new model of anything, of leadership or whatnot. The first thing that comes to mind is we need to know what the old model was and really like reflect and be aware. Like being self-aware, I think, is the key to like the grounding, the change to come, kind of like being rooted in learning about yourself so that you can learn, and then learning best practices and kind of understanding where you want to go. You know, starts with kind of like being self-aware, being reflective in that way. And I think a lot of the times we don't create space for that as leaders in particular, or in this new age, you know, after COVID, you know, there's even less time, it feels sometimes, to do all the things we need to do. And this kind of work can easily get pushed to the sidelines, and is so important to keep centered, especially for leaders to kind of be sitting and revisiting, thinking about this is an exercise we literally just did with our graduate students across the university this past weekend, who are the Lipman Family Prize Fellows, is thinking about your own values and being reflective on that, knowing that as leaders of organizations, whatever your values are, it's going to be infused into the culture, into the way you do your work, the way you treat your staff. All of that is so important. And really, another piece is related to leadership, kind of, Jeff, as you were talking about, just like the ways that we could be doing things differently in philanthropy, how we take on the burden of the work or whatnot, is I think kind of, oh, I just lost my train of thought, but how we can be thinking about the ways that how can we try new things? I guess in the leadership lens of things, the way we talk about it at McNulty is through experiential learning. How can we experiment, and not in a way that is burdensome to the people that we're working with, but as a learning mechanism for ourselves, and not be afraid to try something different and reflect on it, learn from it, capture the, you know, the things that are how we want to apply it the next time, and just being able to have that kind of growth mindset to be able to no, we don't have to be stuck in the way we've done things, even if we don't see that as like a trend across philanthropy, and we're kind of piggybacking onto the train. We can be the leaders in how we affect structural change in our systems, things like Mackenzie Scott is doing, and the ways that we approach our work.
And that is one of the things that I've appreciated with the approach to leadership, is that in a lot, I hear it reinforced a lot with our colleagues at Lipman and McNulty, that great leaders are great learners, right? Because the world is far too dynamic and things are always being thrown at us, that is the only way to lead through what we have. I am mindful of time, and so and I know Casey, which she always has a great thought, but I'm going to answer one more question, and then I'm going to ask Casey and Euria and Jeff, and then I'm going to invite Elaine back in after I answer this one question, in the spirit of learning, right? Just one quick thing that you want to leave our attendees of this webinar with. So I'll let you think of that, and then I'll answer a question that has come in. Does high impact philanthropy imply that donating to well-known mega organizations like IRC or the Red Cross or the ACLU, Family Planning, World Resources Institute is not high impact? What's the difference with organizations like those and your exemplars? I'm just beginning with all of this. Okay, so thank you for that great question. No, that is not the implication at all. In fact, let me just take one example from the great list you provided. IRC and Red Cross. Those are large, as you described, the mega organizations that are well known for their role as first responders to disasters around the world. We know, and it's in the toolkit, that effective disaster relief, just like you've heard, cannot be provided with just one kind of organization. So high impact philanthropy is about understanding what is required to create impact. And IRC and Red Cross bring certain capabilities that a small community-based organization cannot. Similarly, a small community-based organization has capabilities that the IRC and the Red Cross don't. The IRC and the Red Cross have decades of experience in hotspots around the world, a global supply chain with technical expertise that knows how to address certain types of things like search and rescue and quickly setting up an emergency room in the most demanding of circumstances. They bring that unique capability, but they don't know the terrain, the language, the sort of last mile that's needed to get relief to those who might be most affected. That kind of very local knowledge in a disaster setting. Knowing, oh, which of these houses has a car we can use? Or who is trapped where and what language can be used in order to find people. That's the kind of very specific local knowledge that you have to be working in a community and have the trust of community members in order to be able to provide. So when we think about it, it's not that this nonprofit is a high impact one and this nonprofit is a low impact one. What we always say is high impact philanthropy starts with what's the change you're trying to create? And thinking about the role that, frankly, lots of organizations have to play. And if you're clear on why you're supporting a particular organization and the role that organization is playing, then you're practicing high impact philanthropy. Okay, the lightning round. Elaine, can you rejoin us? Great. I'm going to start with Casey because I saw her hand up earlier. Last thought for the folks who joined us today.
Well, before that, I just have to say, preach and mic drop, Kat. So great. And I know everybody else is probably thinking it, saying it, or giving you the hearts or the clapping hands from the emojis, but the both and instead of the either or, and really leaning into the polarities so deeply resonates. Final thoughts. I just got back probably around midnight last night from spending the last 4 days with our teams in Detroit and Cincinnati and working with so many amazing organizations and community members, our stakeholders around so many issues that we were lifting up today around eviction crisis and mental health supports, meaningful inspired fellowship work for young men of color. And that, as I was reflecting, I think the common thread for me coming up in my time with these incredible human beings is that when there's collective spirit and effort and resource, combined with that focus and connection and determinedness to see equitable change and be committed to this in spite of the days and most days when it is very hard and when the shininess wears off, so to speak. I deeply believe that's the place in true partnership where impact happens. And so I would say to all of you, simply roll up your sleeves, lean into complexity, the hard things, offer support, because authentic partnership is not one directional.
Authentic partnership. Jeff, final thought.
That's really great. I really like that. I say check the prior art. I think one of the things that is surprising to me is how often the problems that we're wrestling with have been addressed by somebody else. And sometimes it may turn out, well, the problem's just hard. And it's not, there's nothing more to it than that. The problem's hard, or maybe there's something that really has been done and tried and can move you down the road you're going a lot further and faster. So I think the work that is done at CHIP to highlight what's working is worth staying current with. And if you're diving into an area, have a look at what's been done before.
Fantastic. That is actually one of the principles we teach in High Impact Philanthropy Academy, is that you want to go farther, then make sure that you are building off of what other people have already seen and know. Euria.
What you both said really totally resonated with me and is changing what I'm thinking for my last thought. Because that authentic partnership piece and checking the prior art, I feel like we see that so much, like how valuable it can be to learn from each other by sharing our stories of learning. Whether on the funder side or organizations, it's interesting. Yamba Malawi and Make a Difference both have really interesting stories of their origins and how they pivoted, like everything that they're doing and their whole model because of their learnings about the outcomes and not seeing that the impact that they wanted to make. And you know, we don't have to all make the same mistakes, or we don't have to all have the same learnings ourselves. We can learn by hearing from each other and you know, having those conversations and building that network and that partnership of you know, having our learnings be broadened really by the conversations we're having. And that requires vulnerability and trust and community and you know, investing in how we talk to each other well. That's also important for that secure future we're talking about.
Right. Elaine, welcome back. Parting thought for folks?
Yeah, you know, as I listen to all of you, there are two words that are coming to mind: the concept of relationships and community and connection. All of those that, you know, when we talk about values, when we talk about impact, direct service, or equity and systems-based work, all of those can be tied to this uniting factor of where we're humans working with other humans and trying to connect and build relationships and figure out how to solve these problems together. And one of the key trends that we've noticed over the last year is that we've seen an increase in support from donors for charities they've previously supported. So consistency to nonprofits in a time of difficulty, while also adding new elements to their portfolio, and seeing that complementarity is really powerful. And I think something we don't want to forget, that deepening those relationships with the nonprofits you already know and love, and also seeing who they're partnering with to figure out where you want to go next is really a key part of what we're seeing as a strategy.
Fantastic. Well, I want to keep everybody on time. And so thank you, partners, colleagues, for sharing your perspectives today. I'm going to pass it on to Kelly to bring us home.
Thank you for coming. We have two events that we want, or two things we want you to know about. We have an info session tomorrow for our High Impact Philanthropy Academy. So if you're interested in that, you can find the registration on the page below, and we'll send it in the follow-up email. You will get a short survey, a 1-question survey. We like to measure our own impact here. So please be sure to fill that out and look for the follow-up with the toolkit and the invitation to the info session tomorrow. And thanks for coming.